As a history teacher, I often wonder, what would social media look like if it had been around in the 12 or 1300s? You could watch Genghis Khan take a quiz to see which Taylor Swift era he's in. Red, obviously. Influencers would all be raving about the newest hashtag Champa rice recipe. Mansa Musa would totally be live streaming his Hajj. Unfortunately, we'll never know, but we do have the next best thing, which is an app that combines our insatiable need to scroll with historical figures helping you study for your AP exams. It's called TeachTap. Using generative AI and the exact content that you need to know to get a 5 on your AP exams, TeachTap has created the ultimate study app. Just download the app, sign up, and pick which courses you want to study for. You're going to come across memes, pop quizzes, timed practice tests, all with explanations from actual historical figures, kind of. It's the closest thing we have to time travel yet. Download TeachTap, start scrolling, and good luck.
Hey, welcome back to Anti-Social Studies, where today I'm going to be writing an AP World History DBQ. I'm writing one of the ones from the 2023 exam. This is from set 2. It's going to be about Muslim women as kind of instigators of change from the mid-18 to the mid-1900s. And why am I doing this? I have on my YouTube channel already a bunch of videos of me writing DBQs and SAQs and stuff live. I'm doing some new DBQs because if you haven't gotten the memo, the College Board has changed the rubric for the DBQ. Now, to be clear, they haven't changed the different elements of the rubric. It's all the same things you're expected to do. What they have changed significantly is the point values, meaning how much of a thing you need to do to get the point. And in my opinion, they've made it significantly easier. So what I want to do is I want to write a DBQ live in front of you. I'm not going to do much editing. I'll put timestamps though in the bottom if you want to kind of skip ahead to different parts. And I want to do that because I want to show you what I would encourage you to use as your strategy on the AP exam when you're writing the DBQ. Now, this is going to be relevant, especially for those of you doing the digital exam, which after this year is going to be everyone. But even if you're still doing the paper exam, you can Frankenstein your essay the way that I'm doing it. It doesn't have to be neat. You can leave space for yourself. You can do arrows and draw, write it here. But I really just want to show you how I would approach it. So I'm going to put timer. I'm going to put an hour on the clock, although I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. Let's do it. So just to be clear, I have not read through all of these documents yet. I glanced at it last year when they released the questions because I was curious, but I have not looked at it since. So you are going to get a chance to see me kind of respond to this live, see how I sift and skim through documents, all that good stuff. So for one, if you want to follow along, I have the link in the caption. You can just Google AP World History Free Response 2023. I'm working with set 2. And so, again, the question is, evaluate the extent to which Muslim women in the Middle East challenged social norms from 1850 to 1950. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to be working on this kind of simple little Word document that I've made for myself that has all of the different rubric points right in front of me. I'm going to just write or remind myself of the prompt. So I'm going to have it here so it's on my document at all times. Evaluate the extent to which Muslim women challenged societal norms 1850 to 1950. I'm going to make sure I got that right. Again, this is partly me making sure that I really understand the prompt as I'm being asked. Muslim women in the Middle East, right? So I think it's really good to just make sure from the very beginning you understand what are the parameters of this prompt. I have to stay within the Middle East. I'm talking about Muslim women specifically, and I have to stay within the time period 1850 to 1950. And at first glance, I'm a little nervous about this prompt, as I'm sure a lot of the students were, because this might not be something that you explicitly talked about in your class, this specific of a prompt, let's say. But remember that the entire goal, the whole point of the DBQ is the College Board wants to know, can we give you a prompt that you don't know the answer to? And then can we give you 7 documents to help you figure out the answer? That's what they're testing you on. So if you get a DBQ prompt that you already kind of know, consider yourself lucky. But if you get a DBQ prompt like this, that you're like, well, I actually don't know how I would answer this question, don't worry, that's the entire point. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to skim through the documents. And one of the big changes to the rubric this year is that to get full credit, at least for using the documents, you actually only have to use 4 documents now. It used to be 6 out of the 7. And so really one of the big changes to your strategy is that you should be really empowered to skip 1 or 2 documents. Meaning you look at it, if you get to a document, you're like, I don't really understand what this document is saying, be encouraged to skip it, right? For me, as long as I use, let's say 5 documents in my essay, that way if I mess one up, I still have 4 left, I'm good, which means I can full out ignore 2 documents that I look at and go, I don't understand what the College Board wants me to get from this. Okay, so document 1 is going to be, you're going to read the source information word for word. Then you can skim the document to see what you need and what you find and what you can use. So this is Aisha. I do not know who this person is, but they're an Egyptian woman, poet, and novelist. It's an essay titled Family Reform, comes through the education of girls. It was published in a conservative Egyptian newspaper in 1889. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, document 1, Egyptian woman advocating for girls' education, 1889 newspaper. Just as a little reminder to me about what this is. Okay. Great. And now I'm going to just take a few really simple notes on, again, I'm not trying to understand this entire document word for word. I'm grabbing evidence that I might be able to use to talk about, okay, are Muslim women advocating change? Yes or no? And I'm already guessing this is going to go on the yes side because of the title, right? So this is where reading the source is like, you might already know half of what you could talk about without even going into the document. Okay. It's the duty of the male establishment to concern itself with the education of girls. Okay, great. His educated wife loves him, manages his household. He works to hide her abilities and fears that by announcing her worth, she's an educated woman, it will disrupt his peaceful life. How astounding that our civilization is obsessed with decorating young women in jewelry, but this casts these girls into a pit of evil. They've earned nothing from these trinkets but vanity. If male authorities strove for the improvement and progress of these girls' behavior, they would find themselves adorned with necklaces strung with pearls of wisdom. Oh, this is beautiful. I can tell that she's a poet. Also, this is kind of a complex document. This is one that I'm going to think about, but this is one that is actually a little bit more complicated than you think. So the most simple thing from this is that she's saying men should want young girls to be educated. Like that's the basic thesis of her argument. And if I only pull that from it, that's okay. But there is something more complex going on here too, of saying like, because it will signal like that Egyptian society is more developed, complex, advanced. It's sort of something like, wouldn't we, like, why do we want our girls to just be all about looking beautiful? We as a society, if we want to portray ourselves as this deep, complex society, then we want our girls to also be thinking deep, complex thoughts. I like this. Okay. I've just like grabbed information from that document. There are parts of that document that I kind of skimmed over. Keep in mind, right, especially if this is your first AP exam, is your first DBQ that you're writing for the College Board, that's all you need to do, right? You do not need to understand every single word of a document. You then, when you write about it in your essay, you're going to notice I don't really quote from it. I don't even summarize the whole thing. I'm just pulling out the evidence that is useful for me as it relates to this question, right? Okay, document 2. It is a Lebanese woman writer, Fair and Equal Treatment essay published in an Egyptian newspaper, 1891. These are both published in Egyptian newspapers. I don't know what that means yet, but that is interesting. Okay, so document 2, she's a Lebanese woman, but published in an Egyptian newspaper. And I'm going to just mark that as like interesting. I'm not sure why it is, but she's from Lebanon, so why isn't she publishing it in Lebanon? Or is it that Egypt is maybe a little bit more open to some of these ideas than some other countries in the Middle East? I'm not sure. And it's called Fair and Equal Treatment. Okay. All right. So now let's skim. The fact is, we have not seen any law coming from Islam ruling that women are to be prohibited from involvement. Ooh, a woman is just as much a human being as a man is. So many women have ruled over men, participated in government, gone forth into battle, like the many queens who have preceded us and ran their kingdoms well. Awesome. Regarding the poor women in Cairo or Alexandria, most of them pursue work just like men. They're merchants, blah, blah, blah. They earn their livelihood just like men do. Markets are full of women who can compete with men in business. The intelligent person who examines the world affairs finds the two sexes equal. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward, and it's also a very good argument. Women are just as capable as men in government, economy, public life, etc. Boom. Like, go to the local market and you're going to see women running their own businesses too. Like, why do we think that they can't do anything else? And look at our past, especially maybe the past kind of in the Middle East, especially in Egypt, where there was a very famous queen. Oh, I'm already starting to hit accidentally. Egypt had a very famous queen, Cleopatra. And I know Hatshepsut. They were both female pharaohs. So all of a sudden I'm thinking about, Why might this be a good argument that she's making in Egypt specifically? Well, it's a land where we have had female rulers in the past, so why are we so weird about it now? Great, okay. Keep in mind, I'm only considering hip or evaluating the sources, like historical, situation, intended audience, purpose, point of view. I'm only doing that if it jumps out at me. Notice I'm not forcing it. I didn't really think about if or how I might hip document one at all, but if something pops out at me and my brain already starts thinking about it, I'm gonna just mark it down so that I don't forget it later. Okay, now let's look at document 3. Doria, Egyptian woman, feminists, all Egypt. Okay, unpublished memoir written in 1960, but describing an event in 1915. Already I'm like, that is interesting because this is like a secondary source, but it's about her own memories. So there could be something fun to evaluate about potential bias or potential like maybe it changed in her view as she got older sort of thing. But for now, let me just say we have an Egyptian feminist memoir, and I'm gonna put this in bold or something so that I remember that this is interesting to me, written in 1960 about an event in 1915. Great. Okay. So let's see what happened to her. An agitated atmosphere reigned in our house. The news had just, okay, our family friend had learned a husband had taken a second wife because she'd given birth to twin daughters but hadn't produced a male heir. The first wife said, I want a divorce. I was astonished by the woman's violent reaction, as well as the energetic opposition to her decision by the women around her. Grandmother, I don't understand you women of today insisting on exclusiveness. By taking a second wife, the husband reduces the burden on the first woman. Okay, so like back in my day, men took multiple wives. Third wife, never pronounced the word divorce, it brings dishonor. Okay, my grandmother's words seemed to act as a whip over the other women as the thought of their daughters being old maids sank in and they rallied around her. Forget this idea, you must fight to regain your husband's love. Woo, woo. Okay, so this is like women counseling other women to not push for as much change. So this is going to be an interesting one, right? This is going to be generational divide, basically, between women. Older women are more accepting kind of the traditional marriage, which might include multiple wives, while counseling younger women to do the same, not push for exclusiveness, which would be more like a modern, kind of a what we think of as a modern marriage. Okay, so this will be interesting because this is a really interesting document on its own because we could use it for either side of an argument. We could say, well, yeah, this younger woman is pushing for change. She's saying, I don't want this. I don't want you to have a second wife. I want us to have a like modern, quotes, more like Western monogamous marriage. And then other women are saying, don't do that. So that's an interesting one. We could use that document maybe in both arguments if we're going to say, yes, they push for change and no, they didn't, which is always good when that happens because you can sort of pick where you want to put it and where it can serve you best. Okay, document 4 is a cover of Le Petit Journal of a French illustrated news magazine, a feminist demonstration against British rule in Egypt. Oh, and thank you, there's a caption, because I was like, oh no, I don't know what this is. This is really interesting too, because it's all men in front, but it's a feminist demonstration. I'm gonna have to read the caption in a second. Okay, so for now, I'm just gonna say, French journal showing feminist demonstration against British rule in Egypt, okay? And then please give me something good in the captions, because otherwise I don't know what to do with this. A caption in French below read, while in some streets of the city riots broke out, the women of Cairo organized in certain quarters into important processions. A group of British soldiers on horseback is shown in the background on the left. So I see some women here, they're like wearing the niqab, they're covered. There's men in the front, which is interesting to me, and I'm honestly not sure what to do with that. I'm inclined to be like, oh, were men involved in this too? But then I'm like, everything else tells me no, they probably wouldn't have called themselves like feminists. So let's see. Okay, this is like a weird one that I might not use. I'm a little confused by it. But I mean, the biggest thing is that there were basically women used like independence movements and like anti-imperialism movements to also push women's rights. That's like the basic that I'm getting from this, that there was a march against British rule that included everybody. And that feminists are saying, well, let's make our own little like march within a march to talk also about like women's rights, maybe within the new independent Egypt. And I do know historical context of this. I do know 1922 Egypt. This would be a really good one to talk about historical situation, because I know this is right after World War I. Egypt in 1922, finally independent fully from Ottoman rule. But I know we kind of have this like British mandate system in the Middle East coming up. So again, if you see something where you go, oh, 1922 Egypt, and your brain goes, oh, I know what was happening in Egypt in that moment because I know it's right after World War I. That is a really good opportunity for that, evaluating the historical situation of a document. That doesn't mean like the context of the whole essay. That means the specific situation of this document. So again, I'm marking it down so that I remember later if I have time and I want to evaluate or source the documents. I remember that might be a good one. Okay, I have a question here. I'm going to put a big question mark. Men on front of cover. Like, it seems weird to me that it's an illustration, so they could have chosen however they wanted. They could have drawn it however they wanted, but they had men in the front, even though it was like a feminist. So does that mean men were there? Anyway, we're going to move on for now. This is a good example of like, I'm getting hung up on this document, and I've gotten the basics from it, and I'm going to move on. If I want to think about it more later, I can. I probably will. Document 5 is an anonymous Turkish woman. That's always interesting. Anonymous. Gives you a little bit more freedom. Interview on the popularity of ballroom dancing. Cool. Okay, in a journal in Istanbul in 1924. Awesome. Totally throwing me for a loop here. Okay, anonymous woman on ballroom dancing in Turkey, 1924. Again, like early independence. I kind of know what's happening. This is like right after the Ottoman Empire fell apart. Okay. When a few years ago the dance craze came through, I was hesitant to take it up. They would rave. Dancing in a man's arms was ridiculous. When just a few years early we would not have been able to even sit next to them. Ooh. Eventually I came to embrace dancing. They kept accusing me of stupidity for my refusal to join them. Oh. Even though I was naturally inclined to be conservative, I decided one must accept these new trends. Okay, so this is really interesting. New trends are pushing boundaries. Men and women dancing together when recently they couldn't even sit next to each other. Okay, so that's really interesting. Now her reaction to this is also interesting, but in order to be able to go to a party, I took dance lessons. I love this lady. Oh my gosh. The dance party was amazing. My husband's behavior annoyed me to no end. His glances suggested he did not like seeing me mingle with strange men. I danced until the morning. Yes, I paid no attention to the clumsiness of my feet. I was excited to be able to punish my husband for his rude behavior. She is my new favorite woman in all of world history. Okay. So husband did not like her dancing. She didn't care. Great. This is awesome. This is like a little personal account of like how women's internal attitudes are starting to change. Like, screw you. I'm going to go dance. This isn't Footloose, right? Like, I'm going to dance when I want to. Cool. I love that document. All right. Document 6. Now, I want us to notice, I've already done 5 documents. If I was panicking, if this had taken me a long time and I was like, oh no, I need to get writing, you could just start writing now, right? I mean, in theory, you could say, okay, you know what? I'm going to try to build an argument with these 5 and then come back and look at 6 and 7 later. If you have time, I would encourage you to look at all 7 documents so that you can maybe make a better argument. You can maybe plan out better like what it's going to say, thinking about which ones you want to include. But just keep in mind, if you're slow to work through the documents and you get through 4 or 5 and you're already like 20, 25 minutes in, maybe go ahead and write like some basic arguments. Use those documents first so that you can get some points on the page, basically. Then you can come back if you have time and look at the ones that you didn't get to. I'm going to look at the last 2 though. Document 6, Eastern Women's Congress, Summit of Women from Muslim Countries held in Iran. Okay, this is like pre-Islamic Revolution Iran. Under the direction of a princess, the Pahlavi princess. Awesome, 1932. And what does this Congress say? The Congress supports the following. We love just like a list, right? The right of them to vote and be elected to office, compulsory education for girls, equal salaries, kindergartens. Oh my gosh. Measures to improve the morals of Eastern men. Oh my gosh. Polygamy must be forbidden. Alcohol and narcotics should be prohibited. Well, very similar to like the temperance movement in the United States. That could be interesting historical situation of like, maybe I don't know if they're inspired by the temperance movement, right? But prohibition was a big women's rights issue, right? Make the home safe, make husbands basically safe by not allowing them to go drink their paycheck away and then come home. Hiring female police officers. This is pretty cool. Okay, so tons of demands for women's rights, and then I'll just do a few of them, like equal pay, vote and elected to office, prohibition of alcohol, etc. So I remember, like, I might actually just go back and reference this document because there were so many cool things listed once I decided to start using it in my essay. Finally, document 7. Zainab, an Egyptian woman, leader of the Muslim Women's Association, a group associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, a memoir published in 86 about the 1940s. Okay, again, so just a reminder that it could be interesting to analyze, like, to what extent have these memories been changed, maybe by things that have happened in Egypt since the 1940s. This was the pact I made my husband before entering our marriage. Okay, there's something you need to know before you become my husband. I've sworn an oath of loyalty to the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. I've pledged to live my life in God's path, call others to Islam. It's my right to demand that you not block me from pursuing it. So, like, I'm going to be a political activist. I'm going to be politically involved. And if you want me as your wife, you need to know that from the beginning. When the day comes my calling leads me to join the ranks of the fighters for the establishment of the Islamic State, do not ask me what I'm doing. If ever the welfare of our marriage conflicts with God's calling, the marriage will end and the calling will become my whole life. It is your right to command me, and it is my duty to obey, but know ahead of time that God is greater than us, and our marriage and his calling must be dearer to ourselves. Whoa. Okay. This is really interesting. And I want to kind of think about why it's interesting in a second. But first, let me get the basics down. So, woman telling future husband she will be politically involved and will prioritize basically the Muslim Brotherhood over him. And I'm going to just put, like, interesting because she is, like, pushing and pursuing her individual rights as a woman. But the organization she's working for probably actually would want her to have a more traditional role. Like, she is being, like, an independent woman, but for a very conservative cause. Like, the Muslim Brotherhood, like it said in the caption, wants Islam to dominate more of Egyptian politics, make it less secular, which typically is better for women. Typically when it's more religious, when it's more kind of fundamentalist, typically women's roles decline. Okay, but the organization she's working for is very conservative, and we might assume would want women's roles to be more traditional. This is really interesting. This is like a Serena Joy situation, if you've seen The Handmaid's Tale. Kind of. Okay, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed by this. These are 7 documents that I've never seen before. Just to be very clear, like, I've literally never seen any of these documents. This is something I really didn't know anything about. So it's going to take me a second to think through what my argument is going to be. The good thing is that, honestly, if they ask you to evaluate the extent of something, you already kind of know what your argument's going to look like. It's either going to be like, yes, this thing happened. So I'm either going to be like, yes, Muslim women challenged societal norms. No, they didn't. Or most likely, they did a little bit of both. They did challenge societal norms in some ways, but not in others. So what I'm getting from this is, like, a through line is that women want to have more power over their own lives. They want to be able to make choices for themselves. They want to make choices within their marriage. Like, I want a marriage where there's only one wife. So other people might not care about that, but I do. Or I want to be politically active, or I want to be able to vote. But that doesn't always mean that they're pushing for, like, total secular society. Oh, this is actually kind of complicated. Okay, what's my argument going to be? I'm just going to say some women pushed for, like, full equality. Because they did. There were some that were radical. Like, some Muslim women pushed radical movements for full equality between men and women. That's, like, one argument. And I'm going to use, like, document 6. That list of demands would definitely be one. I'm going to use maybe document 4, the feminist movement. 2, women deserve fair and equal treatment. They're just as capable, for sure. Let's see. Document 4. Any of the ones that are, like, pretty straightforward, like women deserve equal rights, I'm going to throw that in there. And also, yeah, document 1, women deserve education. And then this next one though is kind of interesting to me. So just to be super clear, I could stop here and just make one big argument that's like, yeah, some Muslim women push to change societal norms, wanting full equality, and I could use these 4 documents and that'd be great. Like, if I have a good thesis, I used all 4 of these to support this, then I would already have a 3 out of 7. That's the beauty of this new DBQ rubric, is that, like, I don't actually have to make a super complex argument to start earning points. And so honestly, I might start there, but I want to think about what the other ones have in common, which is that, like, Muslim women wanting more independence for themselves doesn't necessarily mean they want society to become more modern, secular, Western, etc. For sure that'd be document 7. I'm curious if there's any others. Like, to me, oh, the women, the older women maybe? Older women counseling against change. I might even just say, like, the woman wanting to dance, that, like, she's not necessarily wanting to, like, make big changes to society. Yeah, the idea being that, like, yes, some women are going to go full out, basically radical feminists and be like, we want full equality. And then some women are going to go, well, I just want more independence to be able to go dance, but I'm not trying to, like, upend the whole societal norms. Or maybe on the more extreme side, I want full independence to be a political activist for a conservative cause. Okay, it seems like those are my 2 arguments. Now I got to start typing. Now, what I'm going to do for right now is I'm just going to put these 2 sentences basically together to make, like, a first thesis. I always write my thesis twice. I always have a thesis in the intro, and then I rewrite it in a new way in the conclusion, just because sometimes after you've written your essay, it's a lot more clear to you. So it might have been confusing at first to the reader, by the end is clear. So I'm going to go back to the prompt. Let me reread the prompt one more time. Evaluate the extent to which Muslim women challenged societal norms 1850 to 1950. And I'm basically just going to focus on the societal norm of, like, women's role. Now, keep in mind, this could be about anything. It could be societal norms about children. It could be societal norms about education, but really it's mostly about women's role. So I'm going to start with the years. Between 1850 and 1950, many Muslim women directly challenged societal norms about gender roles in the Middle East through political action. Boom. Simple thesis. However, some women were more focused on their individual, this is where it's, like, not super clear to me yet. We're more focused on their individual rights within personal relationships rather than upending all of Middle Eastern society. Okay, so that's like a complex thesis. I'm giving kind of 2 sides of it. Just to be clear, I could have stopped at that first sentence and that would be a simple thesis statement. I would get a point for that. I have a clear answer. Yes, many women directly challenge societal norms. That's my answer. My line of reasoning is they're talking about gender roles through political action. So that's it. But I wanted to add one more. That makes it a little bit more of a complex thesis. I'm going to start with my simple argument first, though. Many women formed political organizations or joined broader movements to push for women's rights across society in the Middle East. Okay, now let me go look and see which documents I want to use. I wanted to use number 1. Okay, advocating education. So I think I'm actually going to move document 1 to my other argument. So I'm going to actually just kind of push this down and say I'm going to actually worry about that one later. Let me go back to the ones that are a little more straightforward for me. So number 2 is just saying women can do everything men can do. Great. So let's just add that one here. So many women, I want to keep my topic sentence up here. Okay. Great. In document 2, a Lebanese woman argues that women have always displayed their equal capabilities in society, running businesses, in markets, and even ruling. entire civilizations in the past. Document 2. Okay, so I have like the basics there that like I'm showing the reader. I understood what document 2 was about. I'm gonna move on for now. I like addressed document 2, great. I'm gonna come back and give more analysis if I have time. So now document 4, French journalist, and then document 6. I like document 6. Going even further, the Iranian princess organized a, what was it called? It was like a women's conference, women's convention, Eastern Women's Congress, to make specific demands for the increased participation of women across Middle Eastern society, including voting rights, being able to be elected into office. Great, and I got that from document 6. Okay, cool. So those two go together. They're like actively arguing for kind of political things. And then I'm saying like the last one was like the women joining in this like Egyptian anti-British movement. Many women recognized the opportunity that decolonization and independence movements gave to broader conversations about rights. Some women's groups carved out spaces for, let me go back and look at this document one more time. Used independence to push for women's rights, a feminist demonstration against British rule. Okay. Some women's groups carved out spaces for feminist unity, even within a bigger anti-British demonstration. That wasn't like super clear, but I think it's fine. That's document 4, right? Yeah, document 4. Okay. Okay, so I don't feel like I'm making like a super complex argument right now, just to be super clear, but I want you to see what I'm doing. I'm just like getting these basic ideas down on the page. I'm saying like, listen, I understood what these basic documents were saying and they apply. These 3 are kind of like women pushing for more political freedom, for more societal freedom. None of these are a very complex analysis yet. I haven't evaluated any of the sources or whatever, but I've gotten 3 documents down on the page. And what's really nice is that I know that I feel pretty good that this is a solid thesis statement. That gets me 1 point. And I feel pretty good that I've at least shown, like I've addressed these 3 documents, which gets me a 2nd point. So all of a sudden I already have 2 out of 7, which remember, you're not shooting for a perfect score here. You're not going to write the perfect DBQ in May on your AP exam. You're shooting for a pretty good essay. If I could get up to 5 points, I'd feel very, very good. And I'm already on my way there, right? If I use one more document now, which I already kind of have, I've started to down here, then I'm well situated. Okay, now for my more complicated argument. However, it wasn't always as straightforward as Muslim women pushing for full equality within Middle Eastern society. Notice how I'm like kind of rephrasing the prompt. That's partly to like help my brain focus in. I don't want to go off on a tangent that's not relevant. And it's also making sure the reader knows like I still know what I'm talking about. I am capable of like making an argument and sustaining it throughout. Okay. It wasn't always as straightforward as Muslim women pushing for full equality. Now I'm going to go like, for example, an Egyptian woman, again, I'm kind of using this very specific. An Egyptian woman argued that girls' education should be a major concern for male politicians. Document 1, great. But the argument doesn't say anything about what girls might be able to do with that education. For example, entering public life, voting, etc. It positions girls' education as a symbol of like Egyptian civilization, pearls of wisdom, instead of, what did she say? She said like trinkets or something? This is document 1. She said, we're obsessed with decorating young women in jewelry and exaggerating their beauty. They have nothing but these trinkets and vanity. Pearls of wisdom instead of trinkets and vanity. The conversation is still centered around appearances rather than substantive change in the lives and like options of young Egyptian women. Now, just to be clear, that might not be totally right. Like this article, document 1, is an excerpt. There might be another part where she's like, great, and then when girls get education, they should go vote. But I'm just saying in this document, she doesn't say that. She doesn't say like girls should get education so that they can go do all these other things. She's just saying girls should go to school, and it looks really bad that for you men that girls can't go to school. So what I'm arguing here is like, yeah, she's pushing for something that's a societal change, girls going to school, but she's not necessarily trying to like upend the entire system. And yeah, this is a step in the right direction, but like even the language she's using is about beauty and vanity and pearls and whatever. It's not about like women being full independent human beings. Okay. So now I've used 4 documents and I feel pretty confident I did this right, which means I've earned another point. This is where the new DBQ rubric is nice because now already, if I ran out of time right here, I think I would have a 3 out of 7, which is like a totally okay DBQ score, especially on the AP exam. Again, we're shooting for, if I could get up to 5 points, if I could be trying for 6 points, oh, that'd be great. Understanding that I might miss or mess up on 1 or 2. Again, if we end up getting like a 4 or 5 somewhere in there, we're doing a really good job. I think I can keep going and keep adding more documents here. So the next one I had, oh right, the older women. So to me, there's a connection here about like baby step change and generational change. Obviously, it is often easier to convince men to accept societal change when it's presented as a, I'm going to just put in quotes, baby step, like this one. This is partly true because older generations are more set in their ways. See, I'm kind of transitioning to this next one, are more set in their ways and often struggle to accommodate newer, more modern ideas. In, what document is this? Document 3, women of different generations are discussing marriage. The older women cannot believe a younger woman wants a divorce now that her husband has taken a second wife. They advise her to not worry about it and fix her relationship with her husband so that she remains the favorite. I think that's what they said. Let me go make sure I'm reading that document right in document 3. I think they were like, just make sure you're the favorite wife. Forget this idea, you must fight to regain your husband's love. So not necessarily be the favorite, but fix her relationship with her husband so that she will regain his love. If she divorces, they fear she'll never marry again. Again, this is document 3. In this document, again, I'm just going to make sure it's really clear, like how this document relates back to the prompt. In this document, we see a younger generation of women pushing societal norms away from polygamy. However, this woman is exclusively concerned with her own marriage. She's not arguing for the abolition of polygamy like the Women's Congress was in document 6. Her societal change is on an individual level, and pushback is coming from other women who are afraid that even that small step towards modern norms might disrupt the entire system. Okay, so I'm basically just pointing out that like, hey, it's complex here, right? Like this is women with multiple women, like some women are saying, no, don't push the societal norm, and others are saying yes. Even the woman who's saying, yes, I want to push the societal norm, it's just for her own life. She's not saying, I think every single woman should ask for a divorce. She's saying, I think I might. So again, I'm now becoming more clear about my argument that like, basically my argument is, yeah, women are pushing for changing societal norms, but they're doing it on different scales. This is why like, it's sometimes good to just start writing, because honestly, I wasn't quite sure what this argument was going to look like. Now I'm becoming a lot more clear. I'm actually going to go ahead and do my conclusion right now and just rewrite my thesis now that it's become more clear to me. Notice I'm not going to delete my first thesis. Remember, the grader can't take points away from you. So worst case, if that thesis wasn't great, okay, I won't get a point. I'm going to rephrase it now that it's becoming more clear in my head. I'm going to be a little more definitive here. Across the Middle East from 1850 to 1950, Muslim women were pushing against societal norms, especially their role and rights in a patriarchal society. What differed, however, was the scope and scale of these movements. While some women formed organizations hoping to create change on a national or even international scale for all women, others focused on their own lives and individual experiences, expanding their independence and opportunities while not necessarily advocating for systemic change. Ooh, that's a really good thesis now. Okay, good. Okay, when I first started this, I'm gonna be totally honest, I was a little nervous. I was like, I'm not really sure what argument I'm gonna make here. That makes a lot more sense. I'm basically saying my simple answer is yes, they did. My more complicated answer is, but they did it in different scopes. Some are like, I want a little more independence. I want to dance, even if my husband doesn't want me to dance. And other women are like, I want all women of the Middle East to be able to vote, right? Two different, both on the same track, but two different scales. Okay, now I'm going to go back to this dancing document. Some women were simply pushing for simple pleasures that wouldn't, on their own, radically change society, but felt like big changes within their own personal experience. One woman bravely danced publicly, something she had thought she was too, quotes, conservative to ever do, despite her husband not wanting her to. And then I'm gonna get a little justice for her, right? Like, in the scope of world history, this act might not seem very revolutionary. And it definitely wasn't as far-reaching as movements advocating suffrage or prohibition, etc. However, this small internal change demonstrates how the broader women's movements were impacting Muslim women across the Middle East, changing their internal perceptions of what was proper and allowed in their daily lives. So I'm saying, like, yeah, this doesn't seem like a very big deal, and it's kind of not a big deal. You're like, I want all women to be able to vote, but it also just shows that, like, these bigger women's movements they're trickling down, right, to where this woman's going, yeah, fine, F it, I'm gonna dance, right? That was document 5. Okay. Now, how many documents have I used? I feel like I've almost used all 7. I feel like the only one I haven't used, what's document 7? Oh, the Muslim Brotherhood. That one's super complicated. But let me see, have I already used 6? 1, 2, I have, oh my gosh. So let's go back to the rubric for a second. Let's pause. Let me see kind of where I'm at. So, okay, so with this really simple rubric that I've put at the top of my page, I've just broken down the 7 points, and notice that I'm classifying them as like kind of the easiest points to get, medium points to get, hardest points to get. You should sort of view your essay in this way, like building blocks. You're kind of building from the bottom up, meaning you're not going to sit there and then magically on your first go write a 7 out of 7 essay. You want to start with like the simpler points, which to me are the thesis and addressing 4 documents. I feel like I got those in my first go around, right? I already, within my first 2 paragraphs, feel like, okay, I have a solid thesis and I've used 4 documents. So again, I have a 3 out of 3. I have not attempted context yet. I've not attempted additional evidence yet. I've not attempted to hip. Okay, this is a problem. This is why I need to pause, because I was about to go, should I go try to use all 7 documents, which could get me this here, but look, there's 3 points sitting there that I think are easier to get. So I'm gonna pause. I'm not gonna worry about document 7 yet, because I fear that that might take me a little too long to analyze. And I'm gonna go back and grab some of these a little bit simpler points to get first, and then see how much time I have. Context is one I should definitely do. So I'm going to come back up here to the introduction, and what I'm going to do, so when we think about context, context is the only part of the essay where we can leave some of the parameters of the prompt. So we could either talk about women's roles in society before 1850, which I know, but I know in a really general sense, right? I know in general that as the Islamic world became more, they kind of became more conservative over time. Like I do know that Islam in the 600s, 700s was arguably one of the most kind of equal and open religions. But then by the 1800s, a lot of these Islamic states are much more conservative. But I don't know that I know enough detail about that. What I do know more detail about is like women's movements outside the Middle East. So this is where context could be one of 2 things. It could either be, let's take the topic we're talking about and just rewind, see what it was like before the time period. The other way you can do context is say, let's take the topic of what we're talking about right now and let's expand it beyond the region of the focus and see what other women were doing too. And that, as someone who also knows US history, I know a little bit better. So I'm going to say, around the world, Enlightenment ideas had spread beyond just white European aristocrats arguing for more rights, all the way to historically marginalized pushing for independence and equality. Okay, that's not enough for context yet. I haven't really said anything specific, but I'm basically setting out. I'm saying, hey, we did have the Enlightenment. It was first centered around kind of like white British and French dudes. It is going to spread. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, groups that had been dominated by white male society, and I'm going to say like both women and people of color within imperialism, just so I'm clear, like I'm talking about all of this stuff, right, began to use the same rhetoric about rights, liberty, and the individual to expand their role in society. Now, I'm kind of like being super general. I'm gonna now talk about something specific. For example, the women's suffrage movement arose in the 1800s across the Western world. I'm gonna say especially in the US and Great Britain, argued that their countries could not be truly true democracies without the participation of half its people. I think that's enough. So I'm contextualizing. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm showing the reader that I understand that this wasn't limited. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. That it wasn't like just Muslim women, just 1850 to 1950 who were doing this. It was like, hey, this was part of a bigger women's rights movement. I'm gonna do a little transition, like these ideas spread and impacted other regions of the world, especially those who had been controlled indirectly or directly by some of these Western powers during the age of imperialism. So I'm basically explaining that like, hey, here's how these ideas were all able to move back and forth and these women were all able to like work off of each other is partly because like I know Britain and the US are going to have these big roles in the Middle East. And so I'm not saying that like Western women gave Middle Eastern women this idea, but I am kind of saying here's how this flow of ideas was able to happen and maybe happen more quickly than normal, is that Muslim women were not isolated. They were hearing about, they were encountering other women from the Western world who were also part of this suffrage women's rights movement. Great. Okay, now I feel really good that I did context. So notice like that was like a point, a lot easier than going back and hipping two documents, that sort of thing. This is my approach, this is my strategy, is like take the easier points first, whichever points come to you more quickly. Okay, now I think I had a lot of ideas about hip, and I have 3 here that I've already bolded. So I'm gonna maybe try to hip these 3 and hope for this, because I'm gonna be totally honest, I don't know that I have additional evidence. Here's the trick. Additional evidence has to fit all the rules of the prompt. So I would have to know something, I would have to know about a specific like group of Muslim women in the Middle East challenging societal norms from 1850 to 1950. And off the top of my head, I don't. And that's the one, honestly, the one part where like if you get a DBQ prompt that you know nothing about, really the only part that you might not be able to do is this additional evidence. Because I don't know, if I sat here and thought for 30 minutes, maybe I could think of something, but not off the top of my head. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that the other points are really solid. And I'm gonna go and I'm gonna hit at least 2 of these documents. Okay, I don't quite know about, you know what, there's so much stuff in Egypt. I kind of feel like I'm gonna use document 2 as my launching point for this, but I wanna talk about like why so many of these documents are in Egypt. It is interesting to note, this is my favorite sentence starter when you're gonna evaluate the document itself, like evaluate the source. It should be noted. It's interesting to note that, right? You're not necessarily saying like, this is a horribly biased document or whatever. You're just like, hey, another thing to consider, right? It is interesting to note that this essay was published in Egypt, not the author's home nation of Lebanon. In fact, a lot of these documents around women's societal and political rights are happening in Egypt. Okay, so a lot of these are happening in Egypt. So what is making Egypt, like, so it's not clear if these movements are spreading all across the Middle East or are just happening in a few uniquely situated states. For example, Egypt, I do know that Egypt had a period of intense economic and military modernization in the 1800s. They invited Western advisors in, built the Suez Canal, and increased their autonomy within the Ottoman Empire. This situation might have made it easier for women to begin conversations about women's rights as another symbol of modernity, as opposed to other Middle Eastern states that were still much more traditional and less open to change. Okay, so I've really just evaluated document 2. Why is this lady publishing this in Egypt and not in Lebanon? I don't really actually know much about what's going on in Lebanon at the time, but I do know what was going on in Egypt. So I'm basically saying, hey, I understand that like a lot of these documents are being published in Egypt and that, you know, it's about mass protests in Egypt. So like, I know that there's a historical situation in Egypt that might make this easier. And so I'm recognizing the nuance that like, it might be that in other places, none of these conversations are really allowed to happen at all. And maybe the essay should be mostly just about Egypt. Now I can transition though, right? I can say, however, clearly the ideas spread and are not limited to just Egypt. And then I'm going to go into my document about Iran. Okay. What was the other one I thought I could hip? French journals showing, again, it's also about Egypt. So I've already kind of done that. They're fully independent, British mandate. I do think 1932, this one about the princess could also be really interesting. Okay, so Middle Eastern women including voting rights and being able to be elected into office. It should be noted that Iran in the 1930s was becoming one of the most modern and Western states in the Middle East. Their oil industry, this is again, it's just stuff I happen to know about Iran, right? So I'm going to bring this in. Their oil industry was still mostly owned and dominated by Western influences, especially the British. And so these Western governments had significantly more influence within Iranian royal politics. So I know that that's true. Now I still need to be like, why does this matter for this document? The Iranian princess has significantly more power than most women within her country and has probably had a lot more direct interaction with foreign leaders and thinkers. She also has a lot to gain through these measures. As a potential successor to her father, the Shah, it would be in her best interest to be popular amongst this half of the population, especially if they are eventually allowed to participate more openly in public life. Now, I'm gonna be totally honest. I don't love that. I don't actually think that's totally true because people don't vote for the Shah. But I guess what I'm just trying to point out is that sure, you're a princess. Okay, you can convene a Congress. Does that mean that regular Iranian women want the right to vote? We're not really sure. She's in a very privileged position. I'm not confident that that made sense. I think it did. But so that way I'm gonna look, I'm really running out of time, but I want to think about if there's maybe one more hip that I can do just to see, or maybe I could talk about document 7 and try to get that complexity point for using all 7 documents well. I'm going to talk about document 7. I'm just going to make it its own paragraph. The most interesting document is document 7. A wife is preparing her future husband for her long-term commitment to the political cause of the Muslim Brotherhood. She even goes so far as to warn him that if she is forced to choose between this political movement and her marriage, she will choose the Muslim Brotherhood. Document 7. Okay. On the surface, this is a clear example of women gaining more voice and autonomy within their marriages. She not only feels safe to become a political activist in public life, she also is secure in voicing her opinion to her future husband without fear of retribution. Okay. However, the movement she is becoming more involved in is actually pushing for a more conservative Egyptian society. It's ironic that a woman is using her newfound independence and voice to advocate for an organization that is promoting a conservative return to tradition within Egypt, a reaction against the increasing modernity and thus independence for women that Egypt has been experiencing thanks to these women's movements. Okay, I think that's good. So I'm just pointing out that hey, this document is super interesting because, and I think what I've done too is I'm evaluating the historical situation of this document too. I'm saying, hey, I get it. She's saying, don't marry me unless you want a political activist. But then I'm going further. I mean, but hey, let's look at what's going on more broadly. Let's evaluate what the Muslim Brotherhood wants. Let's evaluate what the historical situation of Egypt is and see why this is actually really interesting. Because she's I'm an independent woman and I'm going to be politically active in an organization that is pushing for a more traditional Islamic Egypt, which we can infer might then eventually want her to be less active in public life. Okay, so going back and looking at what I think I've done, I feel pretty confident that I have at least a 4. I feel very confident that I have a solid thesis, especially because I tried it twice, so one of those is bound to work. I definitely used at least 4 documents, because I technically used all 7, and then I think my context is good and detailed enough. I did not even attempt additional evidence. That's totally fine. I couldn't think of anything. And then I think it's possible that I could have gotten 1 or both of these other points. I technically used all 7 documents. I'm not sure how strict they're going to be with this complexity point. Like, I don't know how high the bar is going to be, but I did technically use 7 documents. And then I did attempt to hit 3 documents. So again, my range is, I feel pretty confident I got a 4, which is a really great baseline. I think it's very possible I got a 5. And then like, I could technically have gotten a 6, which would be incredible. So I feel pretty good about this. I think this was actually a really difficult DBQ. If you are watching this and you wrote this DBQ last year, I think this was a really tough one. If you're watching along going, oh my gosh, I don't know if I would have understood all those documents, that's okay, right? I was confused by a few of them. The point is that this new DBQ rubric has made it where you can actually like pick and choose and you can show what you know a lot more efficiently. So again, I ended up using all 7 documents, but remember, you really only need to use and understand 4 to get the points that you need. Same thing, if you were able to bring in an additional piece of evidence, that's incredible, but if not, it's totally fine, right? We're not shooting for a 7 out of 7, we're shooting for a solid DBQ that shows our skills. This is not gonna be like our best writing, so just do your best. Remember, put it on the page, they can't take points away from you. I hope this was helpful. Check out all my review materials if you wanna review some of this content more, and otherwise, good luck on your exams!